your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Trevor Mason had always believed in building things to last. At 38, he'd spent 15 years perfecting his craft as a custom home builder, creating dream houses for families across Colorado. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a man who understood that solid foundations required patience, precision, and unwavering commitment. The same principles had guided his 12-year marriage to Brenna. When they'd met at a charity fundraiser in Denver, she was 24, fresh out of college, and working as a marketing assistant. Trevor had been immediately drawn to her auburn hair and infectious laugh. But more than that, he'd admired her apparent warmth and kindness. She'd seemed different from the other women he'd dated. Genuine, down-to-earth, someone who appreciated the simple things in life. Their early years had been good. Trevor's business, Mason Custom Homes, had grown steadily, allowing them to build their own sprawling ranch house on 10 acres outside Boulder. Brenna had quit her job after their third year of marriage, claiming she wanted to focus on starting a family and supporting Trevor's growing empire. But the children never came, despite their efforts, and somewhere along the way, the woman he'd married had changed. Trevor first noticed it about 3 years ago. Brenna had become increasingly distant, spending more time with her book club, her yoga classes, her girls' trips to Aspen. She'd started complaining about their quiet life, their lack of excitement, the way Trevor always smelled like sawdust and concrete. The criticisms had been subtle at first, wrapped in jokes and delivered with that same laugh that had once charmed him. But Trevor was a man who paid attention to details, and the details had been adding up. The late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The new clothes, the expensive perfume, the sudden interest in working out. The way she'd flinch when he touched her, as if his hands were too rough, too working class for her refined tastes. Most telling of all was the way she'd started referring to their life together as boring and predictable, words that cut deeper than she probably realized. Tonight, Trevor had planned to surprise her with something decidedly unpredictable. He'd been working overtime for weeks, taking on extra projects and pushing his crew to meet impossible deadlines. The overtime had paid for 2 first-class tickets to Santorini, Greece, a destination Brenna had been dreaming about since she'd seen it featured in one of her glossy travel magazines. The resort was 5-star, the itinerary included private yacht tours and couple spa treatments, and the whole trip would last 2 weeks. It was the kind of grand romantic gesture that should have rekindled whatever spark had been missing from their marriage. Trevor pulled into their circular driveway at 9:30 p.m., later than usual, but buzzing with excitement. The house was lit up, and he could see Brenna's silhouette through the living room window. She wasn't alone. Her best friend, Jade Torres, was there, gesturing animatedly with a wine glass in her hand. The two women had been inseparable since college, and while Trevor had never particularly liked Jade's influence on his wife, he tolerated their friendship for Brenna's sake. He grabbed the envelope containing the travel documents and hotel confirmations from his truck, along with a bottle of champagne he'd picked up on the way home. The front door was unlocked, as always, one of the benefits of living in their secure, rural neighborhood. Trevor pushed the door open quietly, planning to surprise both women with his grand announcement. That's when he heard his wife's voice, crystal clear and dripping with venom. God, I hope he crashes on his way home from work tonight. Could use the life insurance money. Trevor froze in the entryway, the champagne bottle suddenly feeling like a lead weight in his hand. Through the archway leading to the living room, he could see Brenna sprawled on their leather sofa, her feet tucked under her, looking more relaxed and animated than she had in months. Jade's laugh was harsh and knowing. Or at least a few more weeks of silent treatment until he gets the hint that you're done playing house with him. How much longer are you going to keep this up, Brent? Kyle's getting impatient. Kyle. Trevor's blood turned to ice water. Kyle Richmond, the smooth-talking personal trainer at Brenna's gym. The man was 10 years younger than Trevor, with the kind of sculpted physique that came from a lifetime of privilege and leisure rather than honest work. Trevor had met him once at a charity boxing match, had noticed the way Kyle's eyes lingered on Brenna, had seen the practice smile that probably worked on half the married women in Boulder. I know, Brenna sighed, taking a long sip of her wine. But Trevor's been so pathetically eager lately, working all those extra hours, probably planning some romantic surprise. It's almost sad how hard he's trying to win me back when I checked out of this marriage 2 years ago. 2 years. Trevor calculated the timeline in his head. 2 years ago was when Brenna had joined the gym, when she'd started her fitness journey and all the lifestyle changes that had come with it. 2 years of lies, 2 years of sleeping next to a woman who was counting down the days until his death. At least Kyle knows how to show a woman a good time, Brenna continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. Last weekend at the cabin was incredible. I felt like a completely different person, like I was actually alive again, instead of just existing in this suburban tomb. The cabin. Trevor knew exactly which cabin she meant. The luxury rental in Vail that Kyle had mentioned during their brief encounter. The same weekend Brenna had told Trevor she was going to a women's wellness retreat. The same weekend Trevor had worked 16-hour days to earn the money for their dream vacation. You know what you need to do? Jade said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Make the move official. File for divorce. Take half of everything and start fresh with Kyle. You're 34, Bren, not dead. You deserve better than a blue-collar husband who thinks a romantic evening is pizza and Netflix. Brenna laughed, the sound that had once made Trevor's heart skip, now making him feel physically ill. The timing has to be perfect. Trevor's business is doing really well right now. He just landed that resort project in Park City. If I wait until after he signs the contracts, my settlement will be worth twice as much. Besides, Kyle and I are having fun with the whole forbidden affair thing. There's something exciting about sneaking around, about having this secret life that Trevor is too stupid to figure out. Trevor's grip tightened on the champagne bottle. The resort project in Park City, the one that would have secured their financial future for decades. The one he'd been planning to surprise her with tonight, along with a trip to Greece. Every detail of the past 3 years suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built a life with, had been systematically planning his emotional and financial destruction while he'd been working himself to exhaustion trying to make her happy. Just promise me you'll be careful, Jade said, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the drama rather than genuinely worried. Trevor seems like the type who might not take the news well. All that quiet intensity, those big hands. I always thought he was a little scary. Trevor, Brenna scoffed. He's a teddy bear. Biggest pushover I've ever met. When I finally tell him I want a divorce, he'll probably apologize for not being good enough and hand over the keys to everything he owns. That's just who he is, a people pleaser who'd rather avoid conflict than fight for what's his. Trevor set the champagne bottle down silently on the entryway table and pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. The tickets to Santorini felt like evidence of his own stupidity, proof of how thoroughly he'd misjudged the woman he'd married. He walked quietly to the kitchen counter, placed the envelope in plain sight, and stood there for a moment, processing the magnitude of his wife's betrayal. Brenna was wrong about one thing. Trevor Mason was not a people pleaser, and he'd never been a pushover. He was a builder, a creator, someone who understood that the most important structures were built on solid foundations and careful planning. But he was also the son of a man who'd lost everything to a faithless woman, and he'd sworn long ago that he would never be that kind of victim. The conversation in the living room continued, each word carving deeper into what remained of Trevor's marriage. He listened for a few more minutes, memorizing details, filing away information that would prove useful later. Then, with the same quiet efficiency that had made him successful in business, he turned and walked back out of his house, closing the door behind him with barely a sound. As he drove away into the Colorado night, Trevor's phone buzzed with a text from Brenna. Working late again? Don't wait up. Jade and I are having girl time. Love you. Red heart. The heart emoji felt like a final insult. Trevor deleted the message without responding and kept driving, his mind already working through the first stages of what would become the most important project of his life. He'd built his last house for someone else. Now, it was time to build something for himself, something that would last. Chapter 2. Blueprint for Destruction. Trevor drove through the night, his mind churning with possibilities. By dawn, he'd reach his old hunting cabin in the mountains, a place Brenna had visited exactly once before, declaring it too rustic for her tastes. The isolation that she'd found oppressive was exactly what Trevor needed now. Space to think, to plan, to become the man this situation required. The cabin had been his father's refuge during his own divorce proceedings 25 years ago. Robert Mason had been a different kind of man than his son, more prone to anger, less strategic in his thinking. When Robert's wife had left him for her tennis instructor, taking half of everything and turning their two sons against their father, Robert had drunk himself into an early grave rather than fight back. Trevor had been 13 when he'd found his father on the cabin floor, empty bottle in his hand, and a note that simply read, "Some foundations are too damaged to repair." Trevor had inherited the cabin and the lesson. He'd spent his teenage years watching his mother parade her new family around town, while his father's memory was systematically erased. The experience had taught him that nice men finish last, that turning the other cheek was just another way of saying you were too weak to fight back. But it had also taught him patience, observation, and the value of striking when your enemy least expected it. Over the next 3 days, Trevor methodically planned his response to Brenna's betrayal. He used his business connections to gather information about Kyle Richmond, learning that the man was drowning in debt despite his flashy lifestyle. The personal training business was a front. Kyle's real income came from his wealthy female clients, women who paid him handsomely for services that went far beyond fitness coaching. Brenna wasn't his first mark, and she certainly wouldn't be his last. Trevor also discovered that Kyle had been lying about several things. The man wasn't 34 as he'd claimed, but 42, with a criminal record that included fraud and assault charges from his 20s. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending in bitter divorces that left his ex-wives financially devastated. The pattern was clear. Kyle was a professional predator who specialized in wealthy, unhappy housewives. The research confirmed what Trevor had suspected. Brenna wasn't a victim in this scenario. She was a willing participant in her own betrayal, someone who'd calculated the cost of her marriage and found it wanting. The woman who'd once cried watching romantic movies had become someone who could casually discuss her husband's death over wine with her friend. On the 4th day, Trevor received a call from his foreman, Miguel Santos, asking about the work schedule for the following week. The conversation gave Trevor an idea that would form the cornerstone of his revenge. "Miguel," Trevor said, "I need you to handle the Park City project for the next few weeks. Something personal has come up." "Everything okay, boss?" Miguel's concern was genuine. The two men had worked together for 8 years, and Miguel was one of the few people Trevor considered a true friend. "Family issue," Trevor replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. "I need you to keep this between us, but I'm going to be out of town for a while. If anyone asks, tell them I'm scouting new locations for expansion." Miguel agreed without question, loyalty that Trevor appreciated and would remember. After hanging up, Trevor made several more calls, putting pieces in place for what would become the most elaborate construction project of his career, the systematic demolition of Brenna and Kyle's lives. The first phase required Trevor to become invisible. He'd already moved money from their joint accounts into a business account that only he controlled, a legal maneuver that Brenna wouldn't notice for weeks. He'd also transferred ownership of several properties into his company's name, protecting them from any potential divorce settlement. These weren't the actions of a man who intended to roll over and play dead. Trevor's phone rang constantly with calls from Brenna, each voicemail more frantic than the last. She'd found the plane tickets on the kitchen counter, had realized he'd been home that night, and overheard at least part of her conversation with Jade. The tone of her messages evolved from confusion to anger to panic as the days passed without any response from her husband. "Trevor, what the hell is going on?" Brenna's voice was sharp with irritation on day 2. "I found the tickets to Greece, and now you're just gone? This is childish, even for you." By day 4, the irritation had transformed into something closer to fear. "Okay, I know you're upset about something, but we need to talk about this like adults. Whatever you think you heard the other night, I can explain. Just come home so we can work this out." The final message came on day 6, Brenna's voice breaking with what sounded like genuine desperation. Trevor, please. I'm scared. Miguel won't tell me where you are. Your friends haven't seen you, and I'm starting to think something terrible has happened. If you can hear this, just let me know you're okay. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I love you. Trevor listened to that last message 3 times, analyzing the inflection in her voice, the timing of her pauses. Even now, facing the potential collapse of her carefully laid plans, Brenna was performing. The tears in her voice were real, but they weren't for him. They were for herself, for the comfortable life she was watching slip away. On the 7th day, Trevor drove back to Boulder, but not to his house. Instead, he went to the office of Patricia Hernandez, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Colorado. Patricia had built her reputation destroying unfaithful spouses, and her initial consultation fee was worth every penny. Mr. Mason, Patricia said, reviewing the file Trevor had prepared, I have to ask, are you certain you want to proceed this way? What you're proposing is completely legal, but it's also going to be devastating for your wife. My wife wished for my death, Trevor replied evenly. She's been planning to destroy me financially while carrying on an affair with a man who has a history of targeting married women. I'm not interested in being fair to someone who showed me no fairness. Patricia nodded, understanding the kind of client she was dealing with. Then let's discuss your options. Based on the evidence you've gathered in Colorado's adultery laws, you have grounds for an at-fault divorce that could significantly impact the asset division. But I think you have something more creative in mind. Trevor smiled for the first time since that night in his kitchen. I do. I want to give my wife exactly what she asked for, freedom from our marriage. But I want to make sure she understands the full cost of what she's chosen. As they discussed the specifics of Trevor's plan, Patricia's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching admiration. Her new client wasn't just seeking revenge. He was architecting a masterpiece of legal and personal destruction that would leave his enemies with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. This is going to take several months to execute properly, Patricia warned. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Trevor thought about his father's note, about the years of watching his mother's new family prosper while Robert Mason's legacy was forgotten. He thought about Brenna's laugh as she discussed his potential death, about Kyle's hands on his wife's body in the cabin Trevor's money had paid for. Ms. Hernandez, he said, I've been preparing for this my entire life. Chapter 3. The Ghost Returns. After 2 weeks of radio silence, Trevor finally came home. But the man who walked through the front door of the Mason house wasn't the same person who'd left with plane tickets and champagne. This version of Trevor moved with predatory stillness, speaking in measured tones that made Brenna's skin crawl with unease. Where have you been? Brenna demanded the moment he stepped into the living room. She'd been pacing for hours, checking her phone obsessively for any sign of her missing husband. The uncertainty was killing her, and worse, it was affecting her relationship with Kyle. Her lover had become distant and irritable as the days passed, clearly uncomfortable with the drama and potential complications of Trevor's disappearance. Working, Trevor replied, setting his duffel bag down with deliberate care. He looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time, his gaze lingering on the wine glasses she hadn't bothered to clean up from her conversation with Jade. I found the investors for the Park City expansion. Spent some time in the mountains, thinking about our future. The word future hung in the air between them like a challenge. Brenna studied her husband's face, searching for signs of the man she'd been able to manipulate so easily for years. What she saw instead was someone who looked like Trevor but felt like a stranger, cold, calculating, dangerous. You disappeared for 2 weeks without a word, she said, trying to inject some righteous anger into her voice. I was worried sick. I thought something had happened to you. Did you? Trevor's question was soft, almost gentle, but there was something in his tone that made Brenna take a step backward. That's interesting. I wouldn't have expected you to worry about my well-being. The words were carefully chosen, loaded with meaning that Brenna couldn't quite decipher. Had he heard her conversation with Jade? How much did he know? The uncertainty was torture, but she couldn't ask directly without revealing her own guilt. "Of course I was worried," she said, moving closer and reaching for his hand. "You're my husband. I love you." Trevor allowed her to take his hand, but didn't return the gesture. His skin felt cold, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing of the warmth that had once made her feel safe and cherished. "Love," he repeated as if testing the word. "That's a powerful thing, love. It can make people do incredible things for each other. Or terrible things." Before Brenna could respond, Trevor's phone buzzed. He answered it without looking at the caller ID, his voice shifting to the professional tone she'd heard him use with clients. "Trevor Mason, yes, I'll be there." "No, my schedule is completely clear. I've decided to take a more hands-on approach to my business relationships." He hung up and looked at Brenna with something that might have been amusement. "I have a meeting tonight." "Don't wait up." "Tonight? But you just got home. I thought we could talk. Maybe go out to dinner, spend some time together." The words sounded desperate even to her own ears, but Brenna was starting to panic. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Trevor was supposed to be predictable, manageable, someone she could control while she planned her exit strategy. "I'm sure you can find something to occupy your time," Trevor said, walking toward the stairs. "Maybe call Jade or Kyle." Brenna's blood turned to ice. There it was, confirmation that he knew. But how much? And what was he planning to do about it? "Trevor, if this is about the other night." "What about the other night?" His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "Is there something you need to tell me about the other night?" It felt like a trap, and Brenna was smart enough not to walk into it. "Nothing. I missed you." 2 weeks is a long time. Trevor nodded as if her answer was exactly what he'd expected. "It is. A lot can change in 2 weeks. I've learned some interesting things about the people in my life, about what they really think of me when they believe I'm not listening." He started up the stairs, then paused halfway. "Oh, and Brenna, I canceled the trip to Greece. I decided we needed to spend more time focusing on our life here in Boulder. I hope you don't mind." Watching him disappear into their bedroom, Brenna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Trevor who'd left 2 weeks ago would have confronted her directly, would have demanded explanations and apologies. This version was playing a different game entirely, one where she didn't know the rules. She called Kyle the moment she heard Trevor's truck pull out of the driveway. "He's back," she said without preamble when Kyle answered. And Kyle's voice was clipped and patient. Their affair had lost much of its excitement during Trevor's absence, replaced by stress and uncertainty that Kyle clearly found unappealing. "He knows something. I can feel it. He's different, Kyle. Cold. He mentioned your name." There was a long pause before Kyle responded. "What exactly did he say?" "Nothing specific, but the way he looked at me." Brenna shivered, remembering those empty eyes. "I think he heard our conversation that night. The one with Jade." "Shit." Kyle's composure cracked slightly. "Okay, don't panic. Even if he knows about us, what's he going to do? File for divorce? So what? That's what you wanted anyway." But Brenna wasn't so sure anymore. The man who'd come home tonight didn't seem like someone who would simply hand over half of everything and disappear quietly. He seemed like someone who was planning something, someone who'd been using the past 2 weeks to prepare for war. "I don't think he's going to make this easy," she said. "Maybe we should cool things down for a while. Wait and see what he does." "Cool things down." Kyle's voice turned sharp. "Brenna, I've been patient with this whole situation, but I'm not going to put my life on hold because your husband is having a tantrum. Either you're ready to leave him or you're not. I'm not interested in playing house with a married woman indefinitely." The ultimatum hit Brenna like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on managing Trevor that she'd forgotten Kyle was equally unpredictable, equally dangerous in his own way. Caught between two men who seemed to be hardening into adversaries, she felt the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in. "Give me some time," she pleaded. "Let me figure out what he knows, what he's planning. Then we can make our move." "You have 1 week," Kyle said. "After that, I'm done waiting. There are other options out there, Brenna. Don't forget that." The line went dead, leaving Brenna alone in the house that had once felt like a sanctuary but now felt like a prison. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows and doors that Trevor had installed with his own hands. Everything in this house bore his mark, his craftsmanship, his attention to detail. For the first time since this whole affair had begun, Brenna wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The Trevor who'd built this house, who'd worked overtime to buy her dream vacation, who'd loved her completely and without reservation, that Trevor might have been worth fighting for. But it was too late for those thoughts now. The man who'd come home tonight wasn't interested in reconciliation. He was interested in something else entirely, something that made her feel like prey being stalked by a predator who'd learned patience. As the night wore on and Trevor didn't return, Brenna found herself checking the locks on the doors and windows, though she couldn't say exactly what she was trying to keep out. All she knew was that the foundation of her world was cracking, and the man she'd underestimated for so long was the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Patience. Trevor's meeting that night wasn't with a client or investor. Instead, he sat in a dimly lit corner of Murphy's Tavern, Boulder's most discreet watering hole, across from Danny Reeves, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Danny had been recommended by Patricia Hernandez, and his reputation for thoroughness was exactly what Trevor needed. "Your wife's not as careful as she thinks," Danny said, sliding a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. "Richardson's got a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he meets her at the Marriott downtown. They use different names, but it's the same room every time, 317. He pays cash, probably thinks that makes him invisible." Trevor opened the envelope and found photographs that confirmed what he'd already suspected. Brenna and Kyle entering the hotel separately, leaving at different times, their body language in the parking garage unmistakably intimate. The images were clear, professionally taken, legally admissible. "There's more," Danny continued. "Richardson's got a history of this kind of thing. I found 3 other women in the past 2 years, all married, all wealthy. 2 of them ended up divorced and financially ruined. The third one tried to kill herself when Richardson moved on to his next target." Trevor studied the photographs of Kyle with the other women. The man had a type: attractive, bored housewives with successful husbands and empty lives. His predatory patterns were clear once you knew what to look for. The initial charm offensive, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the promises of a better life, and then the systematic destruction of the woman's marriage and finances. "What about the wife?" Trevor asked, his voice betraying nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface. "That's where it gets interesting," Danny replied. "Your wife's been busier than you might think. She's been meeting with divorce attorneys, 3 different ones over the past 6 months. Each consultation was paid for with cash from your joint account. Small amounts, nothing you'd notice unless you were looking for it." Trevor absorbed this information without surprise. Brenna had been planning his destruction for months, carefully laying groundwork while he'd been working himself to exhaustion trying to save their marriage. The vacation to Greece had been his last-ditch effort to reconnect with a woman who'd already written him off as a relic of her past. "She's also been documenting things," Danny continued, "taking photos of the house, copying financial documents, building a case for why she deserves a significant settlement. Your wife's not just cheating, Mr. Mason. She's conducting a strategic campaign." "Good," Trevor said, surprising the investigator. "I want her to be thorough. The more evidence she gathers, the better my case becomes." Danny raised an eyebrow. Most men would be upset by this news. Most men don't understand that the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them defeat themselves, Trevor replied. "Continue the surveillance. I want to know every move they make, every conversation, every plan. And Danny, I want you to start looking into Richardson's business finances. A man with his spending habits and his pattern of targeting married women isn't making all his money from personal training." Over the following weeks, Trevor maintained his facade of normalcy while gathering intelligence on his targets. He went to work each morning, came home each evening, and played the part of a husband trying to rebuild his marriage. The performance was convincing enough that Brenna began to relax, interpreting his calm demeanor as ignorance rather than strategy. What Brenna didn't know was that Trevor had installed surveillance equipment throughout their house during one of her afternoon sessions with Kyle. Hidden cameras and audio devices provided him with a front row seat to his wife's betrayal, documenting every lie, every cruel laugh, every moment of calculated deception. The recordings revealed the depth of Brenna's contempt for him. She mocked his work, his appearance, his attempts to salvage their relationship. She and Jade spent hours planning the perfect divorce strategy, discussing how to maximize her settlement while minimizing any potential backlash from Trevor. "He's so pathetic," Brenna said during one recorded conversation. "Last night, he actually asked if I wanted to renew our wedding vows for our anniversary. Can you imagine? Standing up in front of everyone and promising to love and honor a man I can barely stand to touch." Jade's response was equally venomous. "At least you won't have to pretend much longer. Once Kyle gets his business sorted out, you two can go public. I can't wait to see the look on Trevor's face when he realizes you've been playing him this whole time." Trevor listened to these recordings with the same detached professionalism he brought to reading blueprints. Each revelation was filed away, cataloged, and incorporated into his expanding plan for revenge. His targets were providing him with everything he needed to destroy them. He just had to be patient enough to let them finish hanging themselves. The breakthrough came when Danny discovered the true source of Kyle's income. The personal training business was indeed a front, but not for what Trevor had expected. Kyle was running an elaborate blackmail scheme, using his affairs with married women to extort money from their husbands. The man had been secretly recording his sexual encounters, then approaching the women's spouses with demands for payment in exchange for discretion. "He's done this at least 6 times, Danny reported during their next meeting. Amounts ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. The husbands pay to protect their wives' reputations and their own social standing. It's a perfect crime because nobody wants to admit they've been victimized." Trevor smiled for the second time since this ordeal had begun. Kyle Richardson had just handed him the weapon he needed to destroy both his wife and her lover in one devastating blow. The blackmailer was about to discover what happened when he tried to extort a man who understood the value of preparation and patience. "I want copies of everything," Trevor told Danny. "Financial records, correspondence, the names of his other victims. And I want you to find out when he plans to approach me with his proposition." "You think he's going to try to blackmail you?" "I'm counting on it," Trevor replied. Kyle Richardson is a creature of habit, and his pattern is about to become his downfall. That night, Trevor went home to find Brenna waiting for him with dinner prepared and candles lit on the dining room table. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, the one she claimed made her feel beautiful. Her performance was flawless, the loving wife trying to reconnect with her husband. "I thought we could have a romantic dinner," she said, kissing his cheek as he walked in. "Just the two of us. No distractions." Trevor played his part, complimenting the meal and making conversation about his day. But underneath the facade, he was calculating the final moves in a game that Brenna didn't even know she was losing. Soon, very soon, his wife would understand what it meant to underestimate Trevor Mason. The hunter had been patient long enough. Now, it was time to set the trap. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. 3 days after the romantic dinner, Kyle Richardson made his move. The call came to Trevor's office on a Thursday afternoon, Kyle's voice smooth and confident on the other end of the line. "Trevor, it's Kyle Richardson from the gym. We met at that charity boxing match a while back. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There's something I need to discuss with you. It's about your wife." Trevor let silence hang between them for a moment, playing the part of a confused husband. "About Brenna? Is she okay? Did something happen at the gym?" "She's fine, but we really need to talk in person. This isn't something I can discuss over the phone. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? There's a coffee shop called Grind on Pearl Street. Quiet, private. You'll want privacy for this conversation. Trust me." Trevor agreed to the meeting, his voice carrying just the right amount of concern and confusion. After hanging up, he immediately called Danny Reeves to confirm that the investigator would be positioned to record the entire encounter. This was the moment Trevor had been waiting for. Kyle's greed was finally going to be his undoing. The next afternoon, Trevor arrived at Grind 15 minutes early and chose a corner table with clear sight lines. Danny was already in position at the counter, pretending to work on his laptop while his hidden camera captured everything. Kyle arrived precisely on time, looking like a man who'd done this dance before. "Trevor, Thanks for meeting me, Kyle said, sliding into the chair across from him. This is awkward as hell, but I felt like you needed to know. Know what? Trevor kept his expression neutral, though inside he was enjoying the performance. Kyle leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Your wife and I have been having an affair. I'm sorry, man. I know this is hard to hear, but she came on to me months ago, and things just escalated. Trevor let the words sink in, allowing his face to show the appropriate shock and pain. That's impossible. Brenna wouldn't. We're happy. We're working on our marriage. I know this is difficult, Kyle continued, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound sympathetic. But I have proof. Photos, videos, recordings of our conversations. She's been planning to leave you for months, talking about taking half of everything in the divorce. The hook was set. Now Kyle would reel him in with a blackmail demand. Look, Trevor, I don't want to destroy your life or embarrass your wife publicly. What happened between Brenna and me was a mistake. I take full responsibility for that. But if this information got out, it would ruin both of your reputations. Your business would suffer, your social standing in the community would be destroyed. Trevor said nothing, letting Kyle continue his pitch. I'm prepared to disappear from Boulder, end things with Brenna, and delete all the evidence I have. But I need some help starting over somewhere else. $150,000 would be enough for me to relocate and never bother you or your wife again. There it was, the same pattern Kyle had used on 6 other men. The fake confession, the evidence, the reasonable-sounding demand wrapped in the illusion of protecting the victim's dignity. It was a masterful performance from a man who'd perfected his craft through repetition. Trevor let the silence stretch until Kyle began to look uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and measured. $150,000. I know it's a lot of money, but think about what you're protecting. Your marriage, your reputation, your business. Some things are worth more than money, right? You're absolutely right, Trevor said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Some things are worth more than money. Kyle relaxed, clearly believing he'd found another easy mark. His confidence evaporated when Trevor placed a digital recorder on the table between them. Like justice, Trevor finished, pressing the stop button on the device. Kyle's face went white as he stared at the recorder. What the hell is that? Evidence, Trevor replied calmly. Evidence of your attempted extortion, which is a felony in Colorado. Along with the financial records showing your blackmail payments from 6 other victims, it should be enough to put you away for quite a while. You can't prove anything, Kyle said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. It's your word against mine. Trevor smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Kyle shrink back in his chair. Actually, it's your word against you. See, Kyle, I know about Marcus Webb in Denver. I know about Robert Shun in Fort Collins. I know about David Torres in Colorado Springs. Should I keep going, or are you starting to understand the situation you're in? The names of Kyle's previous victims hit like physical blows. The man who'd seemed so confident minutes earlier was now sweating, his eyes darting around the coffee shop as if looking for escape routes. You've been running this scam for 3 years, Trevor continued conversationally. Seducing married women, recording your encounters, then blackmailing their husbands. It's been a profitable business model, hasn't it? Until now. Kyle's desperation made him stupid. Look, we can work this out. I'll leave town, disappear completely. You'll never see me or hear from me again. Just let me walk away. Oh, you're going to disappear? Trevor agreed. But not the way you're thinking. You see, Kyle, I've already turned copies of all this evidence over to the FBI. Extortion across state lines is a federal crime. They're very interested in talking to you. As if summoned by Trevor's words, 2 men in dark suits appeared at their table. Kyle Richardson, one of them said, displaying his badge. FBI, you're under arrest for extortion, fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Kyle's arrest in the middle of the crowded coffee shop drew stares from every patron. As the federal agents led him away in handcuffs, Trevor remained seated, calmly finishing his coffee while Danny packed up his surveillance equipment. Phase 1 of Trevor's revenge was complete. But Kyle's arrest was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. That evening, Trevor came home to find Brenna pacing frantically around their living room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was trying to call Kyle, but his phone was going straight to voicemail. Hard to answer when you're being processed into federal custody. "Where have you been?" she demanded the moment Trevor walked in. "Kyle was supposed to meet me this afternoon, but he never showed up. He's not answering his phone, and I'm worried something happened to him." Trevor loosened his tie and sat down in his favorite chair, watching his wife with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab specimen. "I wouldn't worry about Kyle. I'm sure he's exactly where he needs to be." Something in his tone made Brenna stop pacing. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that Kyle Richardson is no longer your concern. In fact, I think you're going to have much bigger problems to worry about very soon." Before Brenna could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Trevor didn't move to answer it, so Brenna went instead. When she opened the door, she found two police officers standing on their porch. "Mrs. Mason, we need to speak with you about your relationship with Kyle Richardson. May we come in?" Brenna's world tilted on its axis as she realized that somehow, impossibly, her carefully constructed secret life was collapsing around her. She looked back at Trevor, who was still sitting calmly in his chair, watching the scene unfold with what looked like satisfaction. "Of course," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please come in." As the officers entered their home, Trevor finally stood up. "I think I'll let you handle this conversation privately," he said to Brenna. "I have some calls to make." Walking past his wife toward the stairs, Trevor paused to whisper something only she could hear. "You wanted your freedom, Brenna. Congratulations. You're about to get more than you bargained for." The hunter had sprung his trap. Now it was time to watch his prey struggle against the web they'd woven around themselves. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The police interview lasted 3 hours. Brenna emerged from the living room looking pale and shaken, her confidence shattered by the reality of her situation. The officers had questioned her extensively about her relationship with Kyle, his business practices, and her knowledge of his criminal activities. While they couldn't charge her with any crimes, they'd made it clear that she was now considered a witness in a federal investigation. Trevor was waiting for her in the kitchen, sitting at the table where she'd found the plane tickets to Greece what felt like a lifetime ago. He'd prepared 2 cups of coffee, a gesture that might have seemed thoughtful under different circumstances. "How long have you known?" Brenna asked, slumping into the chair across from him. Her voice was hoarse from 3 hours of careful answers and legal evasions. "Which part?" Trevor replied calmly. "About your affair with Kyle? I've known since the night I came home with the vacation tickets." "About his blackmail scheme? I figured that out a few weeks ago." "About your plans to divorce me and take half of everything? I've known about that for months." Brenna stared at him in shock. "Months? But you never said anything. You acted like everything was normal." "Everything was normal," Trevor said. "Normal for a marriage where one spouse is systematically planning to destroy the other while pretending to love them. Normal for a woman who wishes her husband would die so she could collect the insurance money." The words hit Brenna like physical blows. She'd forgotten about that conversation with Jade, forgotten that Trevor had been in the house that night. Hearing her own cruelty reflected back at her made her feel sick with shame and fear. "Trevor, I never meant." "You meant every word," he interrupted. "And now you're going to live with the consequences of those words." Brenna looked around their kitchen, seeing it as if for the first time. This was a room where Trevor had prepared breakfast for her every morning for 12 years. The room where they'd planned their future, argued about money, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. The room where she'd systematically destroyed their marriage while he'd been trying to save it. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Trevor reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the table between them. "Now you sign these papers." Brenna opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were divorce documents, but not the kind she'd been expecting. These papers stripped her of any claim to Trevor's business, their house, or most of their shared assets. The settlement offered her enough money to start over, but nowhere near the fortune she'd been planning to claim. "I can't sign this," she said, her voice rising with panic. "This isn't fair. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together." "Half of everything we built together," Trevor repeated thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something, Brenna. What exactly did you build?" I started my business before we met. I bought this land, designed this house, built it with my own hands. I worked 16-hour days to grow the company while you spent your afternoons planning my destruction. So tell me, what did you contribute to this marriage besides betrayal and lies? Brenna felt tears streaming down her face, but she could see that Trevor was unmoved by her distress. The man sitting across from her wasn't the gentle, forgiving husband she'd taken for granted for so many years. This was someone harder, colder, someone who'd learned to match cruelty with ruthlessness. If you don't sign willingly, Trevor continued, I'll file for an at-fault divorce based on adultery. In Colorado, that means you could end up with nothing at all. The choice is yours. You're destroying my life, Brenna whispered. No, Trevor corrected her. You destroyed your life. I'm just making sure you understand the cost of your choices. As Brenna stared at the papers, her phone buzzed with a text message from Jade. OMG, did you see the news? Kyle Richardson was arrested by the FBI. It's all over social media. Call me. Trevor must have seen her reaction to the message because he smiled that cold, predatory smile she was beginning to hate. Your friend Jade is going to have some interesting conversations with federal agents over the next few days. It turns out that Kyle recorded some of your conversations together, including the one where you discussed the best way to poison me if the car accident didn't work out. Brenna's blood turned to ice. That's not. We were joking. We were drunk and just talking nonsense. Were you? Trevor asked. Because the FBI takes conspiracy to commit murder very seriously, even when it's just joking. Of course, if you cooperate fully with the divorce proceedings, I might be willing to clarify for the authorities that your conversations with Kyle and Jade were purely hypothetical. But if you fight me on this, if you try to drag this out in court or claim assets that aren't rightfully yours. He didn't need to finish the threat. Brenna understood perfectly. She could sign the papers and start over with a modest settlement, or she could fight him and risk spending the rest of her life in federal prison. I need time to think, she said desperately. You have until tomorrow morning, Trevor replied, standing up from the table. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. I suggest you use the time to consider your options carefully. As Trevor walked away, Brenna called after him. What happened to you? You used to be kind, forgiving. You used to love me. Trevor paused in the doorway and looked back at his wife. Really looked at her for what might be the last time. I did love you. Completely. Unconditionally. I would have done anything for you, Brenna. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to make you happy, trying to be the husband you deserved. And in return, you wished for my death. His voice was quiet, matter of fact, but the words carried the weight of absolute finality. The man who loved you died the night he overheard you and Jade laughing about his life insurance policy. What's left is someone who learned not to forgive betrayal. Someone who learned that kindness is a weakness that people like you exploit. Brenna watched her husband disappear upstairs, leaving her alone with the divorce papers and the wreckage of her choices. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the windows of the house that Trevor had built for them with his own hands. But this time, the sound didn't comfort her. This time, it sounded like everything solid in her world was coming apart. She thought about calling her lawyer, fighting the divorce settlement, demanding her fair share. But then she remembered Kyle's arrest, remembered the federal agent's questions about conspiracy and murder plots. She thought about spending the next 20 years in prison for a joke that hadn't seemed funny to anyone but her and Jade. By morning, Brenna had signed the papers. By afternoon, she was packing her belongings into suitcases, preparing to leave the only home she'd known as a married woman. As she worked, Trevor went about his normal routine, getting ready for work as if this were just another ordinary day. Where will you go? He asked as she loaded the last of her clothes into her car. I don't know, Brenna replied honestly. My parents, maybe, at least until I figure out what comes next. Trevor nodded, the conversation feeling as distant and polite as if they were strangers. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for when you decided I wasn't enough. Brenna looked at her husband one last time, searching for any sign of the man who'd once loved her enough to work overtime to buy her dream vacation. What she found instead was a stranger who'd learned to weaponize the same patience and attention to detail that had made him successful in business. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she destroyed. "I know you are," Trevor replied. "But some things can't be repaired once they're broken. Some foundations are too damaged to rebuild." As Brenna drove away from the house that had been her home for over a decade, she realized that Trevor had given her exactly what she'd asked for: freedom from their marriage. But like everything else in his life, he'd built her liberation with precision and care, ensuring that every detail served his purpose rather than hers. The man who'd once loved her unconditionally had become the architect of her destruction. And the most terrifying part was that she'd given him every tool he needed to build her cage. Chapter 7, Reckoning. 6 months after Brenna's departure, Trevor's house felt different. Not empty. Trevor had never been a man who needed constant company to feel complete, but purposeful in a way it hadn't been during the final years of his marriage. Every room had been reclaimed, every space organized according to his preferences rather than the compromises that had defined his married life. The guest room where he'd slept that final night had been converted into a home office. The living room where Brenna had plotted his destruction with Jade now served as a workshop for his architectural drawings. The kitchen where she'd performed her final desperate charade had become a place where Trevor cooked simple meals for himself and occasionally for Miguel and the other men from his crew. Trevor's business had thrived in the wake of his divorce. The Park City Resort project had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, leading to 3 more high-profile contracts. Word had spread through Colorado's construction industry that Trevor Mason was a man who delivered on his promises, someone who could be trusted to handle complex projects with discretion and professionalism. What his clients didn't know was that Trevor had learned to apply the same methodical approach to every aspect of his life. The man who'd once made decisions based on emotion and hope now operated with surgical precision, calculating the potential costs and benefits of every relationship, every business deal, every personal interaction. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Patricia Hernandez, his divorce attorney, had referred several high-net-worth clients to him after witnessing how effectively he'd handled his own situation. Danny Reeves had become a regular consultant, helping Trevor screen potential business partners and employees with the same thoroughness he'd once applied to surveillance work. "You've built something impressive here," Patricia said during a dinner meeting at Trevor's house. She was reviewing the contracts for his latest project, a luxury development in Aspen that would cement his reputation as one of Colorado's premier builders. "Most people would have been destroyed by what your ex-wife put you through. Instead, you've used it as motivation to succeed." Trevor poured wine for both of them, choosing a bottle from the collection he'd started building after Brenna's departure. His ex-wife had preferred sweet wines, limiting his options for years. Now he could explore the complex, full-bodied reds that matched his evolved palate. "Destruction and creation aren't opposites," he replied. "Sometimes you have to tear down what isn't working before you can build something better." Patricia studied him over the rim of her wine glass. "Is that what you did with your marriage? Tore it down to build something better?" "My marriage was already broken," Trevor said. "I just stopped pretending it could be repaired." The conversation was interrupted by Trevor's phone buzzing with a call from Danny Reeves. Trevor answered, putting the call on speaker with Patricia's permission. "Trevor, thought you'd want to know. Kyle Richardson was sentenced today. Federal judge gave him 8 years for the extortion charges, plus restitution to his victims. He won't be bothering anyone for a long time." Trevor felt a satisfaction that was both profound and cold. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the man who'd helped destroy his marriage was now facing the consequences of his predatory behavior. "What about the other case?" Trevor asked, referring to the investigation into Kyle's conspiracy discussions with Brenna and Jade. "The prosecutor decided not to pursue charges," Danny replied. "Without concrete evidence of intent to commit murder, they couldn't prove conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. Your ex-wife and her friend got lucky." After hanging up, Patricia looked at Trevor with something that might have been concern. "You don't seem disappointed that they weren't charged." "I'm not," Trevor said honestly. "Brenna's punishment isn't prison. It's living with the knowledge that she destroyed the best thing in her life for a man who was using her. That's a different kind of justice, but it's justice nonetheless. What Trevor didn't tell Patricia was that he'd been monitoring his ex-wife's situation through discreet channels. Brenna had moved back in with her parents in Ohio, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office for a fraction of what she'd been accustomed to spending in a month. The settlement from their divorce had provided her with a modest nest egg, but her lifestyle had been drastically reduced. More importantly, her reputation in Boulder had been destroyed. The details of Kyle's arrest and the federal investigation had become public knowledge, and Brenna's role as both victim and accomplice had made her a pariah among their former social circle. The women who'd once envied her marriage to the successful builder now whispered about her poor judgment and moral failings. Jade Torres had fared even worse. Her involvement in the conspiracy conversations had cost her a lucrative marketing job, and no one in Boulder's tight-knit professional community would hire her. Last Trevor had heard, she'd moved to Phoenix and was working in retail while trying to rebuild her career from scratch. "Have you thought about dating again?" Patricia asked, bringing Trevor back to the present conversation. "It's been 6 months. You're a successful, attractive man with a lot to offer the right woman." Trevor considered the question seriously. He'd had opportunities, women who'd made their interests clear through professional interactions or social events. But the idea of opening himself up to that kind of vulnerability again felt foreign, almost impossible. "I'm not the same person I was when I married Brenna," he said finally. The man who fell in love with her was trusting, optimistic, willing to believe the best about people. That man doesn't exist anymore. "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing," Patricia suggested. "Trust and optimism are admirable qualities, but they can be weaknesses if they're not balanced with discernment and self-protection." Trevor nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. The man he'd become was harder, more calculating, less willing to make himself vulnerable to other people's betrayals. But he was also stronger, more successful, more capable of protecting himself and the people who deserve his loyalty. "If I ever do get involved with someone again," he said, "it will be on very different terms. No joint accounts, no shared property, no merging of lives until they've proven themselves over years, not months. And if they ever betray that trust." He didn't finish the sentence, but Patricia understood. The man sitting across from her had learned to be ruthless when necessary, to respond to betrayal with overwhelming force. Any woman who entered his life would need to understand that Trevor Mason was no longer someone who could be taken advantage of. As Patricia gathered her documents and prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I think Brenna made the biggest mistake of her life when she chose Kyle Richardson over you. Some women don't recognize a good man until it's too late to keep him." Trevor walked her to her car, watching the taillights disappear into the Colorado night. The words were meant to be comforting, but they struck him as irrelevant. Whether Brenna regretted her choices or not was no longer his concern. She'd made her decision, and he'd made his. Inside the house, Trevor poured himself another glass of wine and stood in the living room where he'd once overheard his wife wishing for his death. The woman who'd spoken those words was gone, exiled from the life they'd built together. In her place was a lesson he'd never forget. That love without boundaries was just another word for vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury he could no longer afford. The foundation of his old life had been cracked beyond repair. But the man who'd learned to build something new on the ruins of his marriage was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than the trusting husband who'd worked overtime to buy plane tickets to Greece. Trevor Mason had learned to become both architect and destroyer, and he'd never forget the price of either role. Chapter 8. No Forgiveness. 2 years after the divorce, Trevor's life had settled into a rhythm of controlled success. His construction company had expanded beyond Colorado, with projects in Utah, Wyoming, and Arizona. The house that had once been a symbol of his failed marriage had become the headquarters of a business empire built on reputation, precision, and the hard-won knowledge that trust was a commodity to be earned, not freely given. The call came on a Tuesday evening in late November. Trevor almost didn't answer. The number was blocked, and he'd learned to avoid unexpected communications. But something made him pick up perhaps curiosity about who would be trying to reach him anonymously. Trevor? It's Brenna. Her voice was different, smaller, uncertain, stripped of the confidence that had once made her so attractive. Trevor felt nothing at the sound of it. No lingering anger or hurt, just the mild interest he might have shown to a stranger. "Hello, Brenna. Why are you calling?" She paused, and he could hear her struggling to find words. "I wanted to apologize. I know it's been 2 years, and I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did to you. What I threw away." Trevor walked to his office window, looking out over the property where he'd once planned to build a future with this woman. "I see. And what exactly do you understand?" "That you loved me completely, and I destroyed that love because I was selfish and stupid and ungrateful." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I lost the best man I'll ever know because I thought I deserved something better, something more exciting. I was wrong about everything, Trevor. About you, about Kyle, about what would make me happy." The words hung in the air between them. Trevor found himself analyzing them with the same detachment he brought to reviewing construction contracts. The apology was probably genuine, born from 2 years of consequences and regret. But it was also irrelevant to the man he'd become. "How's life in Ohio?" he asked, changing the subject with deliberate casualness. Brenna's sharp intake of breath told him she was surprised by his lack of response to her apology. "It's difficult. My parents are getting older, and they need more help than I can give them while working full-time. The money from our settlement is running out faster than I expected. Everything's just harder than I thought it would be." Trevor nodded, though she couldn't see him. "And what about dating? Have you found the excitement you were looking for?" "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "I tried, but I can't trust anyone. After Kyle, after learning what kind of person I'd throw my marriage away for, I can't believe anything anyone tells me. I keep thinking about how he recorded our conversations, how he planned to blackmail you, how little I meant to him beyond being another mark in his scheme. Difficult to build relationships without trust," Trevor observed. "Trevor, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I need help. My dad's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my mom can't handle caring for him alone. The cost of professional care is more than I make in a year, and I don't have anyone else to turn to. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." There was the real reason for the call. Not genuine remorse or a desire for forgiveness, but another crisis that required Trevor's resources to solve. Some people never changed, and Brenna was apparently one of them. "How much do you need?" Trevor asked, his voice giving away nothing of his thoughts. "50,000 would cover the first year of care. Maybe give me time to figure out a longer-term solution. I know it's a lot, and I know I have no right to ask, but I'll have my attorney wire the money to you tomorrow." Trevor interrupted. The silence stretched so long that Trevor wondered if the call had been dropped. Finally, Brenna spoke, her voice thick with tears. "I don't understand. Why would you help me after everything I did to you?" Trevor sat down at his desk, looking at a framed photo of the Aspen development that had just been featured in Architectural Digest. "Because your father was always kind to me, and because taking care of aging parents is the right thing to do. This has nothing to do with you, Brenna. It's about helping good people who don't deserve to suffer because their daughter made poor choices. Does this mean, could we maybe try to be friends again? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe someday." "No." The word was final, absolute. "I'm helping your parents because they deserve help. But you and I have nothing to rebuild, nothing to repair. You made your choice when you wished for my death. I made mine when I decided to become the kind of man who doesn't forget betrayal." Brenna's sob was audible through the phone. "I was drunk that night. I didn't mean what I said. I was just angry and frustrated, and you revealed who you really are," Trevor finished. "People don't become different people when they're drunk, Brenna. They just become honest about who they've always been. You meant every word you said that night, and we both know it. So there's no chance? Ever? You'll never be able to forgive me." Trevor thought about the question seriously, examining his own feelings with the same precision he brought to everything else in his life. Was there any part of him that could imagine forgiving his ex-wife, welcoming her back into his life in any capacity? Forgiveness implies that I'm holding onto anger or resentment, he said finally. I'm not. I don't think about you enough to maintain those emotions. What you destroyed can't be rebuilt because the man who loved you no longer exists. I'm someone else now, someone who learned from your betrayal and used it to become stronger. I don't forgive you, Brenna, because forgiveness suggests that what you did was forgivable. It wasn't. The finality in his voice seemed to break something in her. I ruined everything, she whispered. I had a man who would have done anything for me, and I threw it away for nothing. I'm going to spend the rest of my life alone because I'm too damaged to trust anyone, and no one decent would want someone who betrayed her husband the way I betrayed you. Probably, Trevor agreed without cruelty, simply stating a fact. But that's not my problem to solve. You created this situation, and you'll have to live with it. The money from my parents will be transferred tomorrow. Consider it a gift from the man you used to be married to, not a loan or an obligation. We're done after this, Brenna. Don't call me again. Trevor hung up before she could respond. The conversation had been educational, confirming what he'd suspected about his ex-wife's current situation while reinforcing his own emotional distance from their shared past. He called Patricia Hernandez and arranged for the wire transfer, then poured himself a glass of wine and returned to the architectural plans spread across his desk. The interaction with Brenna had been nothing more than a brief interruption in his evening, no more significant than any other business call. The next morning, Trevor received a text message from a number he didn't recognize. Thank you for helping our daughter. We never forgot your kindness to our family. We're sorry for everything that happened. Helen and Robert, Brenna's parents. Trevor deleted the message without responding, but he felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with his ex-wife. He'd helped good people who deserved help, and he'd done it without compromising his principles or opening himself up to manipulation. 3 days later, Danny Reeves called with an update on Brenna's situation. Your ex-wife tried to contact Patricia Hernandez about the possibility of modifying the divorce settlement. Patricia told her that ship had sailed permanently and that any further contact would be considered harassment. Trevor wasn't surprised. Brenna's apology had been the first act in a campaign to reestablish some kind of relationship that she could exploit. When he'd made it clear that he was immune to emotional manipulation, she tried a more direct legal approach. Both strategies had failed because they were based on the assumption that he was still the same man she'd married, trusting, forgiving, willing to prioritize her needs over his own judgment. Make sure Patricia documents everything, Trevor told Danny. If Brenna continues trying to contact me or anyone in my business, I want a clear record for the restraining order. Already done, Danny replied, but I don't think she'll be a problem. The woman I've been watching for 2 years is broken, Trevor. Whatever you said to her during that phone call finished the job that Kyle Richardson started. Trevor felt no satisfaction in his ex-wife's suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. Brenna had made her choices with full knowledge of their potential consequences. The fact that those consequences had proven more severe than she'd anticipated was a lesson in the importance of thinking before acting, not a tragedy requiring his intervention. That evening, Trevor stood in the living room where he'd first overheard Brenna's betrayal, holding a glass of wine and reviewing the plans for his next project. The room that had once been filled with laughter and shared dreams now served as a monument to the importance of building one's life on solid foundations. The man who'd loved Brenna Mason unconditionally was gone, buried beneath 2 years of hard-won wisdom and carefully constructed emotional barriers. In his place stood someone stronger, more successful, and infinitely more careful about whom he chose to trust. Trevor Mason had learned that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some relationships couldn't be repaired, and some people didn't deserve second chances. The lesson had cost him his marriage, but it had given him something more valuable, the knowledge that he was strong enough to survive anything life could throw at him, and ruthless enough to ensure that no one would ever destroy him again. Chapter 9. Foundations of Steel. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and Trevor Mason had become a legend in Colorado's construction industry. Mason Custom Developments now employed over 100 people across 4 states, with projects ranging from luxury resorts to sustainable housing communities. The company's success had made Trevor wealthy beyond his original dreams, but more importantly, it had validated his transformation from betrayed husband to uncompromising businessman. The call came from his lawyer's office on a Friday morning in April. Patricia Hernandez's assistant explained that there was an urgent matter requiring Trevor's immediate attention, something about his ex-wife and a situation that could potentially affect him. Trevor arrived at Patricia's downtown office to find her reviewing a thick file with a grim expression. Spread across her desk were police reports, medical records, and legal documents that painted a disturbing picture of Brenna's life since their last conversation 3 years earlier. "She's dead," Patricia said without preamble. "Suicide. They found her in a hotel room in Denver 2 days ago." Trevor absorbed the information without visible emotion, though he felt a strange disconnection from reality. The woman who'd once shared his bed, his dreams, his entire life was gone. The finality of it seemed to reduce their 12-year marriage to a historical footnote. "How?" he asked. "Overdose. Sleeping pills and alcohol." She left a note. Patricia slid a photocopy across the desk. "The police contacted me because you're mentioned in it." Trevor read the note, written in Brenna's familiar handwriting, but with a shakiness that suggested either emotional distress or physical illness. "I destroyed the only good thing in my life because I was too stupid and selfish to recognize what I had. Trevor tried to show me real love, and I threw it away for nothing. I can't live with what I did to him or who I became. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. I hope someday he can forgive me, even though I'll never forgive myself." "There's more," Patricia continued. She'd been living rough for the past year. Lost her job in Ohio. Parents died within 6 months of each other. The money you sent for their care barely covered their medical expenses. She's been homeless, struggling with addiction, in and out of shelters. Trevor set the note down and looked out Patricia's window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in this city, the woman who'd once wished for his death had ended her own life, alone and broken. He searched his feelings for some response: grief, regret, satisfaction, but found only a hollow acknowledgement of cause and effect. "The reason I called you," Patricia said, "is that she tried to contact you several times over the past month. My office blocked the attempts per your standing instructions, but the police found dozens of unsent letters in her belongings, all addressed to you." She produced another file folder. "These are copies. The police thought you should see them in case there are any threats or concerning content." Trevor opened the folder and found pages upon pages of Brenna's increasingly desperate attempts to reach him. The letters chronicled her descent from struggling but hopeful divorcee to broken woman facing the complete collapse of her life. Each letter begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for some acknowledgement that their marriage had meant something worth remembering. "I know you hate me, and I deserve that. But please, just once, tell me that what we had was real. Tell me that for at least a little while, you loved me as much as I thought you did. I need to know that I'm not remembering a lie. I've lost everything, Trevor. My parents, my home, my self-respect. The only thing that keeps me going is the hope that maybe someday you'll answer one of my letters. I don't need forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just need to know you don't completely regret the years we spent together. I dream about our house sometimes. Not the expensive things or the luxury, but the little moments. You making coffee in the morning, the way you'd kiss my forehead when you thought I was sleeping, the pride in your voice when you'd show me something you'd built. I threw away a lifetime of those moments for nothing. I'm so sorry, Trevor. I'm so goddamn sorry." Trevor read through the letters methodically, each one a window into the gradual disintegration of the woman he'd once loved. The progression was tragic in its inevitability. Hope giving way to desperation, desperation yielding to despair, and finally despair surrendering to the kind of darkness that made death seem like mercy. She never remarried, Patricia said quietly. Never had children, never found anyone else. According to the social worker who'd been helping her, she talked about you constantly. Said she destroyed the only real love she'd ever known and couldn't figure out how to live with that knowledge. Trevor closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "What do you need from me?" Patricia looked surprised by his clinical response. The police want to know if you have any information about her mental state, if there were any threatening communications, anything that might shed light on her final weeks. No threatening communications, Trevor replied. As you know, I haven't spoken to her since the phone call about her parents 3 years ago. I made it clear then that we had no relationship to maintain. Trevor, Patricia said carefully, I have to ask, do you feel any responsibility for what happened to her? The question was one Trevor had been considering since reading Brenna's suicide note. Did he bear some moral culpability for his ex-wife's death? Had his refusal to forgive her, his absolute rejection of any reconciliation, contributed to her final decision? No, he said finally. Brenna made her choice when she betrayed our marriage. Every consequence that followed was the result of that original decision. I didn't force her to have an affair, I didn't make her wish for my death, and I didn't create the circumstances that led to her addiction and homelessness. I simply refused to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. Patricia nodded, though Trevor sensed she wasn't entirely convinced. The funeral is tomorrow. Small service, just a few friends from Ohio. I thought you should know in case you wanted to attend. Trevor considered it briefly. There had been a time when he would have felt obligated to pay his respects, to honor the memory of the woman he'd once loved despite everything that had gone wrong between them. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that attending Brenna's funeral would be a betrayal of the principles he'd built his new life upon. I won't be attending, he said. Send flowers if you think it's appropriate, but make sure the card is from the company, not from me personally. Walking out of Patricia's office, Trevor felt the weight of finality settling over him. Brenna's death had closed the last chapter of their shared story, but it had also confirmed the wisdom of his transformation. The woman who destroyed their marriage had ultimately destroyed herself, unable to live with the consequences of her betrayal. That evening, Trevor sat in his home office, surrounded by architectural plans and business documents that represented the empire he'd built from the ashes of his marriage. On his desk was a photo from his wedding day, the only picture of Brenna he'd kept. In it, she was laughing at something he'd said, her face radiant with joy and love that had seemed completely genuine at the time. Trevor studied the photo for a long moment, then placed it in his desk drawer next to the copies of her final letters. He wouldn't throw them away. They were part of his history, documentation of the price of betrayal and the importance of choosing one's commitments carefully. But they had no place in his present or future. The next morning, Trevor received a call from Miguel Santos, his foreman and the closest thing he had to a friend. Miguel had read about Brenna's death in the Denver Post and was calling to offer condolences. I'm sorry for your loss, boss, Miguel said. I know things ended badly between you two, but still, it's got to be hard. Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate the thought. You doing okay? You want to take some time off? Maybe get away for a while. Trevor looked around his office, at the success he'd built through discipline and determination. No, I'm fine. We have the Grand Junction project starting Monday. I want to be there for the groundbreaking. After hanging up, Trevor realized that Miguel's call had been the first expression of sympathy he'd genuinely appreciated. The man had worked for him for over a decade, had seen him through the worst period of his life, and had never asked for details or offered unsolicited advice. Miguel understood loyalty, understood that some things were too personal to share even with friends. Over the following weeks, Trevor received a handful of other calls and messages from people who'd known him and Brenna during their marriage. Most were brief expressions of sympathy, but a few were more probing, clearly fishing for details about their relationship and the circumstances surrounding her death. Trevor handled each conversation with the same polite distance he'd mastered over the past 5 years. He thanked people for their concern, confirmed that he was fine, and deflected any attempts to engage him in discussions about Brenna's mental state or their marriage's failure. The past was past, and he had no interest in relitigating decisions that had proven correct through the test of time. 6 months later, Trevor received a final piece of mail related to his ex-wife. A package from the administrator of her estate containing a few personal items that had been specifically designated for him in her will. Inside the package was his old wedding ring, the one he'd left on the kitchen counter the night he discovered her betrayal, along with a note in Brenna's handwriting. This belongs to the man who deserved better than what I gave him. I hope he finds someone worthy of his love." Trevor held the ring for a moment, remembering the day he'd placed it on his finger with such hope and optimism. Then he put it back in the box and filed it away with the other artifacts of his former life. The man who'd worn that ring was gone, and the person he'd become had no use for symbols of failed promises. That evening, Trevor stood on the deck of his house, looking out over the property he'd designed and built as a monument to his own resilience. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of Boulder twinkled against the Colorado darkness, a reminder of the world he'd chosen to remain part of despite his personal losses. Trevor Mason had learned that some foundations couldn't be repaired once they were cracked, that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, and that some people would destroy themselves rather than live with the consequences of their choices. The lessons had cost him his marriage and, indirectly, contributed to his ex-wife's death. But they had also given him something more valuable than love or forgiveness: the unshakable knowledge that he was strong enough to survive anything, ruthless enough to protect himself from further betrayal, and successful enough to build a life that served his own purposes rather than someone else's expectations. The man who'd worked overtime to buy plane tickets to Greece was gone forever. In his place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built not on trust and forgiveness, but on the steel-hard certainty that he would never again allow anyone to wish for his destruction without facing the full consequences of that choice. Trevor Mason had become exactly what the world had forced him to become: unforgiving, unbreakable, and utterly alone by his own careful design. And for the first time since that night 5 years ago, when he'd overheard his wife's betrayal, he was completely at peace with that choice. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.